Hi there. If you have an unfinished basket you want to put a rim on, I'll show you how to do that process using a basic lashing. So I have my basket all completed up until the cut and tuck, so the stakes are all cut and tucked into the rim, and now it's ready to put on a rim and do the lashing. So I have 2 lengths of 5/8 inch wide flat oval reed that go around the basket and overlap about 2 inches. 2 lengths of that. I have a length of 1/4 inch flat oval reed that wraps around the basket 3 times. That's a length that will do a basic lashing all the way around the basket without having to splice in another piece. A length of seagrass that will fit around the top of your basket. A bin of water, a spray bottle with water in it, a straight tip packer or screwdriver or some sort of tool that you can use to create spaces between the rows, a box knife, a pair of reed cutters or shears, and a handful of plastic clamps. These are 2-inch plastic clamps. Check the links in the description below for resources for all of these tools and materials. And now let's get started by putting in the 5/8 inch rim reed into the bin of water to start to soak. Because it's such a thick reed, you want it to soak for several minutes so that it becomes pliable enough to work with. So I'll put that in right away. And then we'll coil up the lashing reed, which is the 1/4 inch wide flat oval reed, and put this in the water as well, because we want this to be nice and pliable so that we don't break it as we're doing the lashing. Now, the reason we have a box knife is because we're going to trim down the ends of the 5/8 inch reed so that we can wrap it around the top of the basket and have it overlap without it being doubly thick in one spot. So we'll trim it down to about half the thickness so that it can overlap. So I'll trim this down about 1.5 inches from the end of the reed. I'm going to trim down the roundedness of this end and get it to about the thickness of a flat reed. And now to start setting up the rim, you're going to use a clamp to clamp down that end that you just trimmed down and wrap the rim reed around the outside over the top or the final row of the basket. So here we have this final row on the basket we're going to overlap with the reed and wrap it around. And I have 3 rim clamps here, so I'm going to wrap it and then clamp it in 3 places around the top of this basket. And then here we're overlapping, and I'm going to overlap where I've trimmed down to this point right here where I ended that trimming down, or started that trimming, I guess, and overlap here, trim this overlap piece to that length so that it covers this trimmed down area. And then I like to cut down the corners on each side and then cut them again so that I have a rounded end to my reed here, and then use this clamp on the end here to clamp both layers of that rim. And you can start to shape the basket rim as you're working. The wetter the reed, the more malleable and shapeable it is. And now I'm going to let the inner rim sit for a few more minutes in the water and spray down the outside of my basket so that it's nice and pliable as I'm working and it doesn't crack as I'm working on it. Okay, let's do the same process of trimming down the end for the inner rim. And then start to curve the rim, the inner rim, so that the rounded side will be on the inside. And we're going to be bending this in the opposite direction of what it naturally wants to curve into. It wants to go with a flat side on the inside. So we need to train it to bend the other direction in order to get it inside of the basket. So I'm just adding some fold, training it to fold the other direction with my hands here. And then we're ready to stick it in the basket, and I'm going to put the end opposite of where I put the outer rim. So I began the outer rim on this side, I'll begin the inner rim on this side, like so. clamp both layers in place, and then gripping the layers with my hands, I'm going to feed this into the inside of the basket so that it's nice and pressed up against the inside, so that there's enough of the reed so that it sandwiches tight to the inside of this basket. And as you're working and you take off a clamp, it will want to shift around, so make sure to keep everything tightly in place with your hands or a clamp as you work. The clamps make it easier because you won't have to hold everything in place as you're working with your hands. They hold it in for you. And then again, when we come to that overlap, you trim your reed down to the right length. And then trim down the corners. And overlap the ends, take out that clamp, and re-clamp it inside of the basket. And there are the rim pieces set up. Now you can grab your piece of seagrass and thread it in. I'm gonna put the end in the space where one of these joints are, the rim joints, and then sandwich all those things together with my clamp, and then feed this into the space between the two rims right above that last weaver, all the way around the rim of the basket. And when you have to lift a clamp up like this where the joint is, just be careful to reposition everything nice and tight when you thread the seagrass back in. And then when you butt up to the where you started the seagrass, leave a little bit of excess and cut the excess off. Now we are ready to do the lashing, so pull out your lashing reed and tap it off onto your towel to remove any excess water. And you're going to start with the rounded side facing up. So start by putting the rounded side facing the inside of the basket into a space between stakes. So I'm going to lift away the inner rim so that I have a space. I'm going to do this space here between these two stakes. I'm going to slide this to the inside of the basket, so between the inner rim and the basket wall. And I can do that by using my straight tip packer to create space for me. Put it in between those two layers, and then gently fold up, loop around, and you're going to stick the end back in between those two layers and create a loop around the inner rim between those two stakes, and pull that end into the inside of the basket and tight around the inner rim. Pull tight like so. Okay, now the orientation of the lashing reed is important because you want the rounded side facing up the entire time that you thread it through, or else it will get twisted as you thread it through the basket and it will crack and just look twisted and not look nice and neat. So to do that, hold the end with your fingers underneath and your thumb on top, and you're going to thread it through your fingers, making sure that rounded side stays against your thumb the whole time. And now I put the starter loop in between these two stakes here. Now I'm going to put my packer in between the stakes next to it. I'm doing the row right under that top row of weaving. So the top row of weaving is under the rim here. I'm putting my straight tip packer in this space right below it, and I'm going to thread this reed, lashing reed, through that space and pull it all the way through. And then making sure the seagrass stays in the space between the rims, I'm going to pull this tight. So you have a nice tight whip stitch there. And then loop it around, and I use my fingers of my left hand to hold the inside, that back side of the lashing reed that's in the basket in place so that it doesn't shift around, and then slide the lashing reed through my hand so that the rounded side stays facing up. And I'm going to move that clamp over just a little bit and put my packer between the top and second rows, and then thread that through, pull all the way through. And then pull tight. You want to give it a nice tight finish and sandwich all those layers together tightly, because as the reed dries it begins to shrink a little bit, and so if your stitches are loose they'll become even looser as it dries and will be more prone to breaking or getting caught on something, and you'll have to redo the rim at some point. So keeping your stitches nice and tight without pulling so hard that you break the reed. And I'm going to move these clamps just a little bit as I work so that they're out of my way. Continuing to do a stitch between each stake. When you come up on where you left off, you're going to put a whip stitch into each of the spaces between the stakes. So I have one last space here. I'm going to do a whip stitch into that space and then pull tight. And then I'm going to use my packer to create a space between the inner rim and the basket, just like we did at the beginning, and loop this end around into the edge of the basket here. Tuck it in and pull down and through into the basket. So we're doing a finishing knot with this reed. And if you have excess reed when you come around, which you probably will, then you want to trim it down to 5 inches before tucking this in. And then pull down inside the basket so that you have the ends here, and trim down the ends to about 1 inch or a little bit less so that they're tucked there in the basket, and that is your finished rim. Go ahead and shape it if you need to make sure that it's round. You can also add corners if you want by folding in a corner with your hands and then clamping it to something straight and solid like a ruler or something on all 4 sides if you want to get that rectangular or square shape. This one is round, so I'm just going to form in that circle shape while it's still wet. Now you want to let this dry for 24 hours so that all layers, all the reed completely dries out, and then finish it with a stain or a sealer. I suggest doing this because if you live somewhere humid, or if it's going to be used for food or something where there will be moisture around the basket, then finishing it off so that no moisture sits on the basket will keep it from molding. I have a post about how to clean a basket once it does collect mold, but if you stain or seal it, it will protect it from that. So I have a video here going over how to stain and seal your handmade baskets. I suggest watching that on how to do that process. If you enjoy making baskets, like this video because it will spread the basket weaving love, and subscribe to my email update list where I send out resources, tutorials, and lots of goodies in the basket weaving, natural dyeing, and other fiber arts communities. I'd love to have you join the Textile Indie community. Thanks so much for watching and weaving a basket with me, and I'll catch you next time.